I said, and I'm on the national board of COPAA, which is the National Professional Organization of Parents, Special Ed Attorneys, and Advocates.
So, Michael, so you are an attorney handling special needs issues, special ed. But can you start by maybe sharing with us briefly what it was like being an autistic student in the public school system?
So I grew up going to Somers, obviously not nonverbal or non-speaking. I grew up in special ed, and I never got the services I needed. Growing up, they told my mother, throw your son away, forget about him. He wasn't going to graduate high school. The social worker said I would never accomplish anything. Clearly, he was wrong. I looked him up because now on the internet, you can find anybody about 10 years ago and found out he died of cancer, so I didn't get that satisfaction. But I always say that I had one friend growing up and the social worker repeated some stuff he said privately to the whole class. The kid never trusted adults again, and the day before his 16th birthday killed himself. So he failed me, but failed him worse. So I never got the education I needed. So once I got to college, I caught myself up. And once I caught myself up, went to college, grad school, law school with great grades. Law school not as good as college and grad school, but the point being that I had to do all that myself. I had to fill in those gaps once I got to college, and not every kid is going to fill in the gaps. I'm not a parent, unfortunately. Haven't found the right woman yet. That being said, I always tell parents, one of the hardest things I tell them is, if you're helping your child at home and the school says he's doing well, you have to stop. Because you're doing their job for them and letting them off the hook. And it's hard to tell parents, you have to let your child fail so the school will do what they're supposed to. But all the stuff you're doing at home is letting the child off the hook. And I heard a story last night from a prospective client. The girl, 8-year-old girl on the spectrum, average intelligence, had a complete meltdown. So they sent her to the hospital and strapped her to a gurney, even though the mother said not to. She got to the hospital covered in urine because she peed herself because the school didn't listen to the mother. So these things happen way too often. And what people were saying, unfortunately, I've seen way too many school districts that blame the parents. I just came through a case, Hope knows the case, where the attorney said the parents were at fault. It was all their fault, and that the kid was making it up and that the kid deserved what he got. Glad Hope mentioned the civil rights issue because COPAA, which is a national organization, again, I'm on the board, Hope's a member, special ed attorneys and advocates who represent families, has always said it's a civil rights organization. And unfortunately, being active in the disability world, when you think of civil rights, disability is so far behind racial equality, gender equality, sexual orientation, than everything else. People talk about diversity and civil rights, and they talk about race, gender, sexual orientation, and they don't talk about disability. And as somebody pointed out, disability is the only group you could join at any time in your life. You could walk out and get hit by a car. You never know what your child is going to be when you have them, that there could be disabled. So, we have to remember this is a civil rights issue. And what Hope said about what happened in Minnesota, if you take this board member's attitude, there never would have been a civil rights movement. We would still have segregation. We would still have women not being allowed the same opportunities. And people with disabilities, including nonverbal autistics, can accomplish things. I know people who are nonverbal, who have master's degrees, who are in professional careers. Nonverbal doesn't mean lack of intelligence, which is something, again, I've never lived it as somebody on the spectrum, but there is an assumption that those who are nonverbal are less intelligent and less cognitively capable. From another point I wanted to add from an attorney's perspective, we go through these hearings. It costs the school districts a lot more to go through a hearing and lose than if they just give the parents what they need from the start. It works well for attorneys like me. We make money doing that, but the truth is, I just want a hearing. If the district had settled it from the start, they would have spent a lot less money. Now they paid my fees, their attorney's fees, and probably some other fees I don't even know about that they could have avoided and paid triple what they would have paid. I don't think most parents know that when you go to a hearing, the cost of the court reporter and the hearing officer is paid by the district. Because districts have more money than parents, regardless of right or wrong, the parents always pay this district always pays the cost of the court reporter and the hearing officer. If a parent wins, they get their fees back from the district. If a district wins, they don't get their fees back from the parents, since again, parents don't have that kind of money. The only way a parent can be forced to pay a district's fees is if the case was so frivolous that it was obvious that there was no case. On the legal part, I mean, I lecture a lot about social emotional learning and how special ed is not just academics. Many people think it's just about academics. What you said about there not being in the law unless there's physical or sexual abuse, I think you said. There are laws against teachers who are verbally abusive to kids. I've seen cases where teachers curse kids out, insult them, insult their parents, and that's not allowed. But the laws do need to be stronger. And again, there is an issue in this country and all over. There's a big push on mental health, which one of you mentioned, that mental health is a huge issue, even before COVID. Now it's even more with all kids, not just kids with disabilities. Mental health services are a part of special ed, and many school districts don't want to address it. I hear many cases where the parents will say, if it's not my kid, it's not my problem. I don't want my tax dollars going to help. There was a case in California where parents had notes left on their door to telling them to move. We don't want your autistic kid in town. I just found out a councilman, I'm from Somers, said Somers is not a place for an autistic people. I've lived there my whole life. So, you know, there's so much ignorance and so much policy to change, but people don't realize special ed is not just academics, as I lecture. They think it's just academics or it's people who are blind, deaf, or in a wheelchair. Most kids in wheelchairs don't need special ed. They need 504 accommodations. They're not looking for specialized instruction. They're looking for ramps and bathroom access. You know, I always say legally, if you're going to have a disability, being blind is the best disability because there are so many cutouts in the law for the blind community that no other disability gets. But the blind get set aside that no one else gets because they've had an organized lobby for so long, and people understand blindness. They don't understand autism. And the truth is, what you were saying about psychoeducational or neuropsychological evaluations, I always tell parents, whatever you're going to get from the district is they're going to know what they want before they find it. A district psychoeducational is usually not worth the paper it's printed on. You want a neuropsychological IE, and every parent should request an independent evaluation because trusting district evaluations is always a bad idea. And the trick that I learned years ago is if the evaluation says recommendations will be made at the CSE meeting, that's grounds for an IE because the evaluator is supposed to provide recommendations, and to say they'll be discussed at the CSE is a cop-out.